Good evening, everyone. I'm Grant Cunningham, and welcome to Training Talk here on Personal Defense Network. This is the show where we talk about you, about your life, and how to protect it. In the next hour, we're going to explore how you can equip and prepare yourself to face that worst case scenario and keep you and your family safe from harm. Now, we don't do religion or politics on this show. This is an oasis in the world where you can sit back and learn all about self defense and the things you need to know, and without crazy fringe commentary or conspiracy theories or anything like that. It's the rational way, I think, to approach self defense training, and I hope that you like it. And if you do like it, please share this with your friends on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, wherever you are. Share it with your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers, your relatives. I'd sure appreciate it if you did, and I know that they would too. So, welcome to the show. If you're tuning in for the first time, thank you for taking time out of your schedule to sit down and listen and learn about self defense and some of the things we're going to talk about tonight. And if you're a returning viewer, thank you for coming back. It's always nice to have you back. And for the returning viewers, you probably noticed we have our little banner thing back. Yay! We went through, if you remember, we've gone through a couple of months of me doing this. We don't have to do that anymore because Google has seen fit to bring us back, which is really great. I'm glad to see it, and because I felt kind of silly using the piece of paper circa 1995. All right. So thank you, Google, for doing that. Apparently, I complained enough that they said, Grant Cunningham is complaining. We should probably do something about that. I'm sure that's what it was. Don't try to tell me otherwise. Anyway, so it is May 18th. This is the May 18th show. This is Mount St. Helens Day here in the Pacific Northwest, because on this day in 1980, Mount St. Helens erupted and spewed ash all over the Pacific Northwest. I remember watching it from a hilltop, and the area, the metro area here in the Portland metro area was just covered with volcanic ash for many weeks. And it was quite a mess. A lot of people lost their lives, unfortunately, but this is always kind of a bittersweet day for those of us in the Pacific Northwest every May 18th. So happy Mount St. Helens Day. And something, we're going to have a little bit of a volcano ourselves here a little later when I start talking to my guest, Aaron Israel. We're going to be talking about competition shooting versus defensive shooting. I'm sure they're probably going to have some things that might make some people in the audience erupt. So an apt metaphor for today. Anyhow, I want to, before we get started with Aaron, I want to talk a little bit about the Personal Defense Network Spring Training Tour, which is in full swing now. Over 100 classes going on across the United States, and things are going very well. People getting out, taking advantage of the learning opportunities to learn how to defend themselves better, and lots of great classes coming up. In fact, I want to show this to you really quickly. We're going to just kind of bring this up here. We're going to start this and show you. I got to click the right button there. Show you what's coming up, because as you can see, if you scroll down, I mean, it just goes all over. And we at the top of the list, we take off the ones that have already happened, right? So this is just the stuff that's still coming up. We've got bunches of classes coming up in the next couple of months until it ends in July. We've got a bunch of great classes from PDN contributor Craig Douglas. He's doing arm movement and structures in Pittsburgh, of all places, and doing another extreme close quarters concepts class in Cincinnati, Ohio. And that's his flagship class. If you haven't taken that, that's a great one. Learning how to deal with grappling and accessing weapons when you're actually into contact with another person. Of course, our executive director, Rob Pincus, is teaching combat focused carbine, combat focused shooting, a bunch of combat focused classes in places like, let's see here, he's going to be in Atlanta, Illinois, and another Atlanta, Illinois, Cesar, Illinois. Okay, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this correctly. Pecatonica, Illinois. I have no idea. Brookfield, Wisconsin, Holman, Wisconsin, and then into Minnesota. So Rob Pincus is going to be doing that swing up north along the Great Lakes, teaching a bunch of classes in there. So if you're in Illinois, Wisconsin, he'll be there teaching some great classes. Our friend Caleb Cobsey, and Caleb has been on the show a bunch of times. You probably remember Caleb is going to be in Bastup. And again, I hope I'm not really mangling that name, but Bastup, Texas, on June 3rd and 4th, teaching medicine XCDC. And if you watched, I think the show before last, we talked about his Medicine X course and how important that is to learn emergency trauma care. So if you're in Texas, take advantage of that one because that's going to be a great class. Mike Seeklander, another one of our great PDN contributors, is going to be doing one-handed survival skills, defensive shooting in Pryor Creek, Oklahoma. He's going to be then teaching his defensive handgun low light skills in Pryor, Oklahoma. And then he goes up to Minneapolis to then he goes, let's see here, up to Pryor Creek, Oklahoma, teaching defensive handgun intensive. So he's got a lot of great classes. And Mike Seeklander is a great instructor, great shooter. And if you have a chance to take one of those classes, do it. He's going to be all over. Our friend Alessandro Padovani is going to be in Arkansas, Searcy, Arkansas, teaching advanced pistol handling and combat focused shooting. So great chance to get with Alessandro, phenomenal instructor. I highly recommend you take a class from Ale if you possibly can. So lots of great stuff coming up. And there's some stuff, of course, happening this weekend that if you're in Colorado, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Iowa, Michigan, Nevada, Colorado, I think I said that, or Michigan, in the next week, there are a bunch of classes happening there that may also have openings. So you can check those out at the Personal Defense Network website. And if you go to the main page, click on the training tab and look at 2017 tour dates and schedules, and you'll get all that information there. Pick a class and get out and train. It's a great spring to get out and get some training, at least in most of the country, and lots of great classes happening. And one of the great things about the training tour every year is that it brings world-class instructors to areas that sometimes you might not get to see them. So take advantage of the spring training tour. If a class comes anywhere near you, grab the class, take it, and expand your personal defense skills. All right. Before we get started with Aaron, one quick thing, of course, sign up for the Personal Defense Network weekly newsletter. It's how you keep track and keep up on all the stuff that's happening at Personal Defense Network with the training tour, keep up with Rob Pincus's videos from the tour, talking about how things are going. And it's free to sign up, and lots of great information comes out in the newsletter every week. Of course, you can find announcements about this show and when this show comes on, when Rob Pincus's live show comes on once a month, and all the other great things, new articles, new videos, new premium videos. We'll talk about premium membership a little later. So sign up. There's a link all over the Personal Defense Network website. There are lots of links. If you're watching the show on the PDN site, there's a link down below that you can sign up for the newsletter. Don't do that now. We're going to get talking here in just a second. But you can always sign up for the newsletter anytime and join the hundreds of thousands of other people, literally, that are getting great defensive information in their email box every single week. So, by the way, I rely on the newsletter to keep me apprised of what's going on here at Personal Defense Network, because there's always something happening, and I can't keep track of it all. Unless somebody reminds me, and that's where the PDN free newsletter comes in, because it reminds me. Anyhow, so this evening we have back Aaron Israel, and we're going to talk a little bit tonight about the intersection of defensive training and competition shooting. And this is something that's kind of near and dear to my heart. And Aaron, it's kind of near and dear to your heart, isn't it?
Yes, it definitely is. Thanks for having me, Grant.
Oh, it's great to have you on. Aaron is in Central Texas, and they have a big, big lightning storm heading his way. So if he sort of disappears, don't worry. His house got hit by lightning. Um,
No rumbles so far.
no rumbles so far. All right. So why don't we get started by talking a little bit about your background in both defensive training and competitive shooting?
Well, I got serious about being a pistol shooter probably about a decade ago when I was still in the military, and I was living in Central Texas. And at that time, I started asking people, I've got my license to carry. I've been carrying a gun. I've done the military training stuff, but I want to learn how to be a better pistol shooter. So a lot of guys, there's a whole bunch of USPSI UPA competitions going on in the Austin area. So some guys in my unit took me out to some matches, and I started shooting competitively back when I was living in Central Texas. And actually, through people that I met at some of the IDPA and USPSA matches is how I got turned on to Personal Defense Network. One of the guys that I used to compete with was friends with Rob, and I ended up taking the combat focused shooting class. And so competition, actually, had I not gotten into competitive shooting, I wouldn't have found out about all the stuff that I teach now on the defensive shooting side. So it's kind of ironic. But yeah, I do both now. I still compete at the club level mostly. I'll do a couple regional matches a year in IDPA mostly, sometimes USPSA, sometimes a little 3-gun. And I also teach the combat focused shooting program. So I kind of run in both circles. So I hear the animosity from both sides of it and the misconceptions from both sides. And I think I do my best to try to bridge the gap. And I've had a lot of guys who compete take the combat focus class, and a lot of guys who've never shot a match before show up and shoot a match and have a good time. So I kind of span the spectrum there.
I should probably tell everybody about my experience in competitive shooting because, like Aaron, I sort of at least at one time I straddled both worlds because I got into handgun shooting back in the early 1990s, and I had always been of course a rifle shooter, hunter and that kind of thing, and then I started competing, and it was the point that I was actually putting together matches at the club level at our gun club. And there was a period of time in my life where I would shoot 3, sometimes 4 matches a month. We would always shoot an NRA action pistol match, which is like Bianchi Cup. We would shoot a steel challenge match because we had steel at our range, and then I would usually shoot a an IDPA type match. And we were shooting this before IDPA really came along. Then when IDPA came along, we sort of adopted their rule book. Although I don't remember if we were an official club or not.
Right.
But I shot a lot of matches over a long period of time, like you, mostly club matches. Uh, and a few, every once in a while, there would be a regional match or an area match that we would go to. And so I spent a lot of time in the competitive world. The difference between us is that I stopped shooting competitively about 15 or 16 years ago now. So I haven't actually shot a match since then, largely because I wanted to focus on the defensive shooting side of things and kind of just drifted away from it. And frankly, you know, kids were getting younger and faster than I was, and that was a lot of it.
That'll happen.
Yeah, and I won my share of club matches and did fairly well at the area matches that we had, and so I was kind of sort of used to that. And the kids were coming in that were just a lot better than I was,
Right.
um, more athletic and could move faster and things like that. And so that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Anyway, so we both have this background uh, in both competition and defensive shooting, and so I think that maybe we have a little more nuanced view of this than a lot of people. Um, so I guess the first thing we should talk about is, do you think that there is a benefit to the defensive shooter from participating in shooting competition?
I think so, yeah, and it's mostly on the mechanical gun handling side of things, like all of the situational and in context things that you pick up from defensive shooting. You're obviously not going to get very much of that in the controlled environment of a competition, but what you are going to get to do in a competition is shoot at a lot of different angles, depending on the stage design. A lot of challenging shots that you're going to have to take at smaller targets at further distances that require a lot more skill to be able to stay competitive. So from that aspect, if you shoot a lot of matches, then your mechanical gun handling skills are going to be fine-tuned. It's the idea of whether you hit the target or not is going to become a foregone conclusion eventually. When I have guys that cross over from the competition side and take a defensive class, I don't have to spend a whole lot of time fixing their mechanics. It's mostly the other things that go into defensive shooting that aren't covered in a competition where I have to work with them. So I think that there's definitely a benefit for a defensive shooter from a gun handling aspect and just getting better at the shooting part once the gun is in your hand, because you're going to get to see a lot of different and more challenging things than you would depending on how well you're able to set up your own personal practice. There's some things you're going to be able to do at matches that you'd never be able to set up on your own, just because of your budgetary constraints and the time that you have, that you're going to be able to shoot at those angles and at those different targets though at a match, and it's going to develop your skills in that way.
Um, so this, I guess this sort of brings up the question, um, what are the kinds of things that, and we hear this all the time from the defensive shooting side of the table, is that competition can instill bad habits that, and I hate this term, you hate this term, we both hate this term, but that'll get you killed on the streets.
Right, right. Yeah.
So do you think that competition shooting might ingrain some bad defensive shooting habits?
Yeah, it will, and I've seen people where it has. The biggest problem that you're going to have if you spend all of your time shooting matches and preparing to shoot matches, and when the way you practice, is that you're going to lose some of your ability to visualize context. So one of the biggest things that you have to do to take into consideration all the things you need to in the context of self-defense is you have to kind of suspend disbelief a little bit and convince yourself that, hey, my whole goal of this practice session isn't just to put holes in the paper really fast. Yeah, I want to do that, but I also want to consider my body's natural reactions, what's likely to happen to me, as far as the probability of who would be attacking me. Like, you're not going to see an IDPA stage where there's 13 guys around 4 different corners and that sort of thing, and you're going to have to visualize what's likely to happen and integrate a lot of the things that you wouldn't necessarily do in a competition. And that's the problem that I see with guys who cross over and will take a defensive shooting class, is that the whole time, regardless of what the drill is, and I'm trying to get them to process information, I'm trying to get them to solve a problem and shoot and do some of those cognitive drills that we do in the combat focused shooting program. And they're always just zeroed in on getting really fast hits on paper, and they take for granted all the rest of the things that I teach them in class, and I have to kind of harp on all of the non-shooting stuff that you just don't get in a competition. So the putting holes in paper once the gun is in your hand part's essentially the same. You want to be able to shoot fast and accurate, balance speed and precision. But if that's all you're able to do and you're not considering all those other things, it's not going to get you killed on the street. I mean, that's hyperbolic, right? We know enough about defensive shooting now to know that the skill set required is pretty low end, right? But what it will is it'll cause you to leave out some things that could theoretically increase your survivability if you're not practicing them deliberately. And if you just shoot matches, you're never going to get the opportunity to do that.
So when you're shooting a match, do you, and let me see if I can phrase this correctly. When you're shooting a match, do you shoot the match differently than your competition does, because of your knowledge of defensive shooting?
In some aspects, yes. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I'm still trying to win. So when you're trying to win, you've got to do things that are going to increase your score, and some of those things put you outside of the context of defensive shooting. So since I don't want to integrate my body's natural reactions before I present from the holster, or move laterally, since, I mean, I'm using my sights a lot more in competition and not looking at the target, when if I was practicing for self-defense and I was that close, I probably would be looking at the target. But there are certain things that I do, like I still do my reloads essentially the same, by keeping my focus on the target instead of looking at my gun and doing that typical, competition workspace reload. This is an inert cert pistol, by the way. I'm not pointing a gun at the screen for anybody who's worried. But, I don't put the gun up in my face to do my reloads. I still do them down in my high compressed ready position. So there are things like that I still do the same. But as far as do I, still follow the rules and shoot every target twice if that's what the stage calls for? Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to visualize an attack and visualize stopping the bad guy and shoot it with a 3 to 5 shot string of fire. And, I take out that whole visualization aspect. So I don't do all of the non-shooting things that I would do when I'm practicing for self-defense in the match, because I would lose.
So let's take sort of the converse of that. Do you find that when you're at the range practicing your defensive shooting skills, that you have to consciously retrain maybe some habits that you picked up shooting the match the weekend prior?
Sometimes, yeah, and that's where discipline comes in. Since my focus, obviously, since I own a gun for personal defense and I carry a gun for personal defense, and I'm not really, even though I say I want to win, I don't, I've got no goals to become like the next Rob Latham or anything like that, right? So most of my practice still centers around defensive shooting, but when it's heavy in competition season, like it is now, I will have to force myself to remember, hey, don't stare at your front sight post the whole time. You can look at the target. It's okay. Remember to move offline when you're getting the gun out of the holster. Don't just stand stationary and wait for the command to fire, right? Don't try to put yourself in the zone and take that deep breath and try to focus on getting that free throw, because we know that, there's going to be all kinds of contextual factors in play, and try to put yourself out of the zone and have to process information. And so I do have to remind myself to do some of those things when I've been shooting a lot of matches. So it's just a matter of how often you're shooting matches and how often you're setting up your practice sessions around preparing specifically for shooting a match.
Do you sometimes find going into a shooting match that you sort of reflexively do things that you would do in your defensive shooting practice that are maybe counterproductive to racking up a good score? Do you have to think consciously about that?
Yeah, definitely. That's what's going to keep me from getting a whole lot of first place trophies, right? Because you do develop that those learned responses to recognize stimuli, and the biggest thing that separates me from the guys who are in the top 2 or top 3. I'm usually top 5, top 10 guy at the club matches, but those guys, it's the footwork and the stage plan and the deliberate movement from target to target and shaving off those tenths of a second that I don't spend a lot of time focusing on in my practice. So my footwork always screws me up. Staging my reloads messes me up, because I'll always do a reload at slide lock, because I don't want to get in the habit of staging a reload just to get to the next target. So those things reflexively going to do, because you're doing it all the time in practice for self-defense.
Uh-oh.
Will limit you in a competition.
All right, we lost about
so it's going to keep you you're not going to be
the okay, Aaron, we lost about 30 seconds of you there. It just kind of came to a standstill, so you can back up about 30 seconds and try to remember what you said, because it sounded pretty good.
Yeah, so basically, yeah, I have problems defaulting to the things I do in defensive shooting. So my footwork is not something I work on very often in defensive shooting, and I always do my reloads at slide lock instead of trying to stage them. And if I don't deliberately stage my reloads and really worry about where I'm going to step and where I'm going to shoot and really plan that out before a stage, then I'm going to get messed up. And I have more of a tendency to, see the targets and respond to them, as opposed to developing a really detailed stage plan. And that keeps me back from the front of the herd sometimes.
Right. So this is kind of a 2-part question. Because there's a variety of handgun competition out there. I mean, you've got IDPA, you've got USPSA, you've got Steel Challenge, you've got Cowboy Action, and then of course you've got the formal bullseye stuff. You've got Bianchi Cup, all this kind of um, handgun competition. Um, of those, which do you think are the most valuable to the defensive shooter? And which do you think is the most harmful to a defensive shooter?
The most harmful is going to be USPSA IDPA, just because it's so close to what you're doing in defensive shooting, but yet so far away on some things. If you really want to just have a good time shooting a gun and meet cool people and all that kind of stuff, you got to do cowboy action shooting, because there's not anything you're not going to have to force yourself to remember to do a lot of stuff, because all the things you're doing in cowboy action shooting are, based on fictitious things and really don't intersect. So if you're doing IDPA and USPSA, then you really have to be disciplined about your practice sessions. Otherwise, they're going to start to creep in on you one way or the other. So, but still, that being said, on the mechanical, gun handling skills we talked about at the beginning, either IDPA or USPSA or cowboy action for that matter are going to develop those high-level marksmanship type skills to a more fine-tuned level. So from that aspect, they're all good, but then the closer you get to trying to mirror context, the more out of context it gets. And so there's more problems, right? So if you want to just have fun, go do cowboy action. Otherwise, you're going to have to be real disciplined and not letting those things intersect too much.
Right. One of my, in terms of just strictly in terms of fun quotient, for me was always Steel Challenge, because there was, never any sort of implication that it was realistic or anything else. And it was just like drag racing, go as fast as you can. And so I always enjoyed that, because I didn't have that sort of issue of trying to reconcile what I was doing there versus what I was doing with defensive shooting. And
IDPA got real bad about that for a little while, but they've kind of, there's really, aside from it's a little bit slower paced and there's a little bit more emphasis on accuracy in IDPA, there's really not a whole lot of difference between IDPA and USPSA anymore. Like, they're not, calling you for using cover, which people were doing wrong anyway when they were doing the match. So both of those are have become just, most of the IDPA matches I go to, they don't even read the quote unquote scenarios when they're doing the match anymore. It's just, here's the stage, shoot it the best you can. And so when you get around a club that actually thinks it substitutes for self-defense and you start to believe that, then it can be a problem. But like you said, if it's just, get out there and drag race, that's why I like to do it, is because I just like to see how fast I can go and still get hits, because it's fun. So,
do you shoot matches with your carry gun, or do you have a dedicated competition gun?
I've got a dedicated competition gun.
Yep. Okay. So what do you typically carry, and what do you typically compete with?
So I carry a Glock 19. That's my everyday, and it's completely stock, except I replaced the mag release and the sights, obviously, the thing most people change out. But other than that, it's stock, no trigger work or anything like that. And then my competition gun is a Springfield XDM competition model with the complete competition workover. I sent it up to Springer Precision and had them polish everything down and put a new trigger in it and all that. So, my competition gun's got like a 3-pound competition trigger in it versus, the stock Glock trigger, which is like, 6-7 pounds. So it's a pretty significant difference.
Do you find yourself, do you find it difficult to switch between the two guns?
Yes, and that's the biggest issue I've noticed lately. I was shooting a lot of matches because some guys that I run around with got me back into IDPA because they were shooting it every weekend. So I decided to go out with them and shoot on their team. And I wanted to win because they're close to the top usually. So I'm practicing with my competition gun, and then Rob Pincus came to town to teach an advanced pistol handling class with me, and I jumped in on some iterations of some of those drills. And going back to my Glock trigger was giving me problems hitting the precise targets because I was not used to having to, deal with the travel of the trigger and the weight of it compared to my competition gun where, it's really not a factor. So going back between these two sets of gear can be problematic. So.
Now when your carry gun, do you carry it in a similar position to where your gun is during competition, or do you carry it in different positions?
Different positions. Yeah, I carry in the appendix position and the off center line. And then, of course, that's not allowed in any of the competitions unless it's like a club match and they go outlaw rules or something. But in USPSA and IDPA, you have to be strong side hip or right behind the hip. So within the limitations of the rules, I have to carry a hip holster when I'm doing my competition, but then I'm usually at appendix. So that's also an issue.
It's kind of funny because when you look back at pictures, particularly with USPSA, back in the late 80s and early 90s, you saw a lot of guys carrying belt holsters, but they were in the appendix position.
Right.
And so that was a hot setup back then. And now today, oh gosh, they don't allow it, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, it is. You want to talk about the killed on the streets thing? Bring that up.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about that for a second because we brought it up twice now. Is the phrase "that'll get you killed on the street"? Does that have any meaning or validity whatsoever?
I understand what they're trying to express. Basically, they're trying to say that there's certain things that you could do in a competition that if you did in a fight, the outcome could be bad for you, right? In other words, the way I like to put it in my article is that there's certain things that you're going to leave out if you're just shooting competition that don't help your survivability any. So what we know, though, from the police statistics we have, from dash cam surveillance, from the data that Tom Givens has collected, is that the marksmanship requirements and what it really takes to survive most plausible gunfights, the skill level is pretty low, right? So the idea that anything that you do, if you can get the gun out of the holster, get it to full extension and shoot a multiple shot rapid string of fire, then, beyond that, it's kind of icing on the cake at that point, right? From a survivability standpoint. So saying that it's going to get you killed on the streets, like based on what data, like where are you getting that from? I just don't think that bears out in anything that we know about defensive shootings. I don't think that anything you do in a competition significantly lowers your chances of survival. There's just some things that you leave out that could increase them, right? So.
Okay. This is a good point to pause for just a second, while we talk for just a second about Personal Defense Network premium membership. So you mind if I do that for a second? Okay, so let's, those of you who are premium members already know about the other side of Personal Defense Network. Now, if you've been on the PDN site and look at all the great free videos and all the great articles, like, I don't know, like the way one Aaron wrote about competition shooting, all that we've just got tons and tons and tons of great free information. But what you might not know is that there's another side to Personal Defense Network, and that's premium membership side. And on the premium membership side of Personal Defense Network, we have tons more videos and full length, like DVD length videos there, complete video, essentially complete video courses that are there. We have video collections where we've sort of curated the best videos on specific topics to save you the time of having to go look for information out there. And this is all great information from PDN contributors. This is vetted information. This is not, some random YouTube stuff that we stuck up there. These are all videos that were made specifically for Personal Defense Network. And there's just a lot more on the premium membership side. And so normally, if you want to get a premium membership here at Personal Defense Network, it's $39.95 a year. But we have a deal for you because you're watching this show, this training talk episode. You can get premium membership, your first year of premium membership here at Personal Defense Network for only $10. That's right, $10. And how do you do that, you may ask? Well, what you do is you sign up for premium membership, and when you're checking out, there's a little coupon code box down at the bottom of the screen. And in that little box, you type this. Grant 10, Grant, the number 1, the number 0, all one word, all one word. And that will get you your first year of premium membership at Personal Defense Network for only $10. You'll be able, and this is, by the way, this is not like limited membership or anything like that. It's full, your first year full membership of for PDN premium members, and you'll be able to have all normal access to all of the great premium membership features for only $10. So it gives you a whole year to get in and look around and watch a whole bunch of these great videos. And for, like I said, for only $10, it's a great deal. There are, gosh, I don't know how many hours of video we have on the premium membership side. I've been a premium member, of course, since we started the program here at Personal Defense Network, and I haven't seen everything we've got there. Honestly, I'm constantly amazed at the stuff I find on the premium membership side of the Personal Defense Network site. So don't just, you don't have to take my word for it. You can try it yourself for, again, only $10 for your first year. Grant 10, Grant, the number 1, the number 0. Put that in at checkout, and you'll get your first year of premium membership for only $10. Check it out. I think you'll be just blown away by the amount of phenomenal content that we have in our premium membership section. So be sure to check that out. There's a link at the bottom of the show page here where you can click on it, and we'll take you to sign up for premium membership, and do that. Take advantage of this deal and see what else there is on Personal Defense Network. So back to you, Aaron. So we're talking with Aaron Risrael, and we're talking about the intersection of competition shooting and defensive shooting, and there are lots of things that go along with this. So we talked about how your gear, the gear that between the two disciplines, has an impact on the results that you get. And we started talking about the carry positions. Do you find yourself when you're either doing your defensive practice or shooting competition, do you ever find yourself reaching to the wrong place for the gun?
Yeah, not so much in my defensive practice, but I have reached towards the appendix position in a competition before, and then had to kind of adjust myself. I don't know why it hasn't come up in my defensive practice, but it definitely has happened at least once in a match. So
That's interesting. Back when I was shooting, I carried my my competition gun and my carry gun basically in the same place. So it never really came up all that much. But I did experience, like you, I did experience the difference between my carry gun and my competition gun. And because mine were radically different, I was typically competing with a single action autoloader, either a 1911. Yes, people, I used to shoot a 1911 in competition. All right.
oh no.
Don't send me emails. I've heard it all. But yeah, I shot 1911s in competition, and I switched to CZ75 clones because I'm not sure really why I did, actually.
Those were real popular again.
Yeah, and I think the switch was really because I wanted to go from 45 to 9mm, and so, but my carry, let's see, when I first started competition, my carry gun was an HK P7. Yes, I know there's some of you out there that are just shaking your heads right now. Trust me, I shake my heads at myself sometimes. But so I was carrying an HK P7 and two, more radically different firearms I don't think you could possibly find. And I did sometimes find myself having issues switching back and forth, and particularly switching from the P7 to the 1911 or to the CZ75, which has a thumb safety. Both of them do. And there were times, even after these tens of thousands of draws that I had done with these guns, I occasionally flubbed and forgot to disengage the safety. Even with that level of experience I had with the guns. So it definitely cropped up for me. I'm glad to hear that I'm not alone.
No, definitely not.
So let's see. What do you, again, two-part question. What do you think the biggest myth about defensive shooting is that competition shooters believe? And what's the biggest myth about competition shooting that defensive shooting believe?
From the first side, the biggest myth about defensive shooting that competition guys believe is that on the defensive shooting side, we don't have the ability to develop our skills to as high a level as they do on the actual shooting part. Like they think that if you're a quote unquote tactical guy, and you come to a match, that you're definitely going to be at the bottom, or that you don't have the shooting skills and that you're focused more on ridiculous things. Like they kind of lump us all together in kind of that tactical Timmy type stereotype, where we're learning how to kick indoors and do things that are just ridiculous and do Navy SEAL, training camps and things like that. And that's what they view when they see the tactical instructor. So the thing about it is that, I know some guys who only shoot defensive shooting classes and are defensive shooting instructors and take the defensive shooting side very seriously and never would shoot a match, who can shoot just as fast and accurate as some of the guys that I've seen in the competitions. And usually what makes up the difference there is, tenths of a second on reloads or footwork or target transitions, swinging between two targets, and things that really don't have anything to do with shooting skill. It's just pieces of the game. So I think they believe that we're all just a bunch of, Rambo wannabes that kind of, play Army all the time. And I think that's a misconception. On the biggest myth about competition from the defensive shooting side is that is the killed on the streets thing. That's the thing you hear most in the defensive shooting circles, is that all of these guys are doing things that are just over the top ridiculous that would get you killed on the streets. And if, Rob Pincus has done some videos with Rob Latham where they talk about where the things intersect, and once the gun's in your hand, shooting is shooting. Getting the gun to full extension, pressing the trigger, learning how to balance speed and precision, that all carries over. So there's a lot of guys that just with a few pointers on some of the things that you can't duplicate in a competition, you can square them away. And I've had a lot of guys cross over from the competition world and take defensive shooting classes with me. And once you get them to start thinking about all the things besides shooting, and they start to integrate those in their practice, they're just as prepared for a worst case scenario as you are if they can integrate those few extra things. So we're not a bunch of tactical Timmies, and they're not a bunch of guys who, are going to get killed on the streets, that are just playing a game. Like a lot of them carry guns for personal defense too. And, there's some of them who, because of the way that they view us, don't want to come take a defensive shooting class because they think it'd be a waste of their time. But the ones that I've been able to convince to come over that have an open mind usually take something really good away from the class to integrate into their practice sessions when they're not getting ready for a match. And so I think that we can both learn from each other on both sides. And I think it's unfortunate that there's so much animosity that we just spend most of our time arguing on Facebook. So.
No, really?
Right.
That is, I think that's true. And I think it's, I don't know from the because I got the perspective of being able to look back, 25 years, and I see the animosity, I think, really getting worse. And I don't know which side it is more at fault. I think they're both at fault. But I wish sometimes that people would open their ears and listen to what the other side is saying, because I think sometimes those of us on the defensive shooting side of it don't pay enough attention to the guys on the competition side, and I think the reverse is also true. And you mentioned the videos that Rob Pincus and Rob Latham did, and those were, I think for a lot of people, those were very sort of enlightening videos to find out that Rob Latham does generally agree with what we do on the defensive training side. And the nice thing is, it's hard to argue with Rob Latham, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think some of the biggest issue I've seen is that a lot of guys on our side won't go to a match. They won't go and walk. We want people to come over and kind of see it from our perspective, but there's a lot of us that won't go into their world at all. Even if it means going over there and losing, go have fun, and just shoot to play the game, and, stop thinking so hard about everything that you're doing, and just go have a good time. And you might accidentally pick up some things that you can take back and help with your students, because sometimes students do have, very serious mechanical issues that, you're going to have a tendency to gloss over if you're focused on a lot of the contextual stuff. And I think a lot of the guys who have developed that high level marksmanship can give you some things that'll help you fix people when they have those issues. So, right. Yeah.
There is, and I know this from personal experience, there's always that desire when you're shooting competition that you, and you just mentioned, you want to do well. And sometimes I think that we start to cut corners, and because of that desire to do well in the match. We want to look good in front of our friends, that are there with us shooting and all that sort of thing. Do you find that and you mentioned it, you kind of alluded to it earlier. Do you find that happens to you, and does that affect how you train and practice?
Yeah, it affects, you want to win. I mean, if you're a competitive guy like I am, I grew up playing sports and, wanting to win trophies and trying to be the best. And if I'm going to go do something, I don't want to embarrass myself, you know what I mean? And so I go out there and I'll play the game the way the game is meant to be played. And you do end up cutting corners. Like if I can save a split second by using the slide catch instead of racking the slide, I might do that, right? If I can keep my eyes focused on the front sight the whole time because I want that tighter shot group because I got a smaller target area to shoot at, even though I could shoot at the body and just get, 2 decent hits, right? I'm going to do that. And there's a whole host of other things that you'll do in a match to cut corners. I mean, even the fact that you have to get yourself kind of in that zone, quote unquote, before the buzzer goes off. You take your deep breath, you think about your stage plan one last time, and then you try to be in the best mindset when the timer goes off. Well, in defensive shooting, we try to do things to put people out of the zone, to get them thinking about something other than shooting the paper, and you're trying to focus real hard on just that aspect in competition shooting. And if you're not careful, then when you come over to the defensive shooting practice that you ought to be doing, you're going to start to think real hard about hitting the paper and stand a certain way and put your hands in a certain spot and try to magic the gun out of the holster really fast without thinking about all of the other factors that come in before you even get the gun out of the holster. Like, do I need to shoot this person? Body's natural reactions, all that kind of stuff can get left out if you're not very disciplined about being deliberate. And one of the things that I've caught myself doing, and I catch a lot of competitors doing that do value personal defense, is that you start to, if you're not careful, convince yourself that shooting a match substitutes for deliberate defensive practice, and it just doesn't. You leave too much stuff out. So you can't start convincing yourself that one substitutes for the other, or you're going to have problems.
Are you back in the early days, particularly when IDPA came in? There were a lot of people, and I don't see this much anymore. And I'm curious because you're more current on this than I am. But we used to see a lot of people who, and perhaps even, and I could be wrong about this, there may have even been promotional materials on IDPA that said this was a good way to train and practice your defensive shooting skills. Yep. I think they started getting away from that, but do you still see people in the competition shooting world who believe that it is somehow a substitute for deliberate defensive shooting training and practice?
Less and less. Like I said, they've kind of, IDPA is sort of moved towards USPSA as being a straight up game, and they've taken some of the this prepares you for self-defense and here's your self-defense scenario and all that is kind of, it's still in there, but people are a lot less serious about it. It depends on the club and it depends on who you're around and how old school they are. The more old school guys might still believe that it substitutes and it really is a realistic scenario that helps you prepare. But I think that's getting less and less, and it's becoming more of a game. But yeah, it's it's still a thing that's out there, and you just have to not believe the hype. Basically, know that you're going there to play a game, and no matter how close you make it to reality. Like I had a friend of mine, he wanted me to do a segment on his show about let's dissect an IDPA stage and tell me what you would do from a defensive perspective. And I'm like, well, if I got 12 guys like in my close proximity, like what kind of a horrible decision have I made to put myself in that situation, and where can I run to? You know what I mean? It's like there's not a defensive tactical way to approach 13 guys attacking you by yourself while you're sitting in your boat or whatever the scenario is, So it's just it's a game no matter what you try to make it, and the people that try to convince themselves that it's otherwise, I think, are doing themselves a disservice. So
you mentioned, you just sort of briefly mentioned in a comment, in a last comment, where you talked about your stage plan, and this is one of the things, at least on the USPSA and IDPA side of things, where you've got a stage plan and you can walk through it and pre-plan everything, and that's often one of the criticisms of competition shooting, is that you get to do a walkthrough, and of course there's no walkthrough in life. And as a result, I've seen some defensive shooters who refuse to do the walkthrough, that nope, I'm just going to read the stage description, I'm going to go for it. Where do you fall? Do you take the advantage of doing a walkthrough before you actually shoot it?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I'll shoot it blind. If I'm at a club match and I'm just there to have a good time, I might, just to see what happens, because I find that my stage plan usually is erased by the buzzer anyway. But yeah, if I'm about to shoot the state championship for IDPA here in Texas in a couple weeks, and or next weekend actually, over Memorial Day, and yeah, I'm going to be deliberate about my stage planning because I want to try to place. Just to see if I can. And so that's critical too. If you want to place well, then you have to develop, that's what separates the top tier from the mid tier from the bottom tier, is your ability to come up with a good plan and then execute it and not get flustered by the things that pop out at you at the stage, right? So if you shoot it blind, I guess you're getting a little bit closer to reality there, but still all the things that you have to do to navigate that stage are totally out of context. So why not just make a plan and try to shoot as fast as you can? Like I don't get why you would shoot it blind, because it's still, you're just going to lose. I mean, you're not going to gain anything, right? So
have you ever thought of and I ran into a fellow once who espoused this point of view. Have you ever thought about getting your competition fix from something completely unrelated, like say shooting sporting clays, doing that and just keeping all the handgun stuff purely defensive shooting?
Yeah, and it depends on where you fall as far as your perspective on that. Like, I think that there's enough room in the human brain, if you're deliberate about it and you're disciplined in the way that you practice, for disciplines that are similar to each other. I don't think that just because you're a NASCAR driver that you can't drive on the highway. I think that you're able to separate those two things if you don't try to drive like a NASCAR driver on the highway. So if you really think it's a problem for you, though, like if you're really afraid of those two things, muddling one another, then yeah, that's a valid point. You should find your fix elsewhere in sporting clays or cowboy action shooting or something like that. That's just totally unrelated. But I don't think that the detriments, if you're really deliberate about it, are big enough that you should forego what's really a fun experience. And honestly, I mean, even from an instructor's perspective, I picked up more students at matches than I have running around in defensive circles. I've got a lot of people that have crossed over because it's oftentimes it's kind of refreshing to them to see that somebody who teaches a defensive class is willing to come play in their world a little bit. So I just don't. For me personally, I just don't buy into that, because I think my brain's got room for both if I'm deliberate about it. But I do understand that perspective if you're really worried about it and it's become a problem for you. So,
someone once likened this, and I suppose this resonated with me because at the time I certainly fell into this boat, that there's a huge difference between driving a car and riding a motorcycle on the street.
Yep.
And and anybody who's ridden a motorcycle for any length of time understands what I'm talking about. And somebody once said, well, yeah, you're able to ride your motorcycle on the street and drive a car at the same time, even though they're very different, and the things you have to watch out for are completely different. The emergency procedures that you have are different.
Yep.
Everything's different. You just happen to be on the same surface. And I thought that was an interesting way to look at it. And I like the way that you put it, that you have room in your brain for both things. So let's see. Provocative question. Shot timers for defensive shooting practice, yes or no?
No, I don't like them because you start to do things to specifically try to beat the timer. So I think that they could be useful. Like, if you're somebody who really likes to see how you're progressing over time on like a certain drill, and you're just using it as a logging method, then okay. But that's not what anybody does. They post their split times on Facebook, and they want to say that there's some kind of importance behind how quickly you shot that bill drill, when it really doesn't have anything to do with it. Now, your progression over time on several different drills might mean something. It's going to show that you're getting faster, but you're also probably doing things that are specific to that drill in order to get faster. And so that becomes your whole goal when the whole rest of the context is left out. So you'll start, like I said, standing in a certain way, staging your hands in a certain way, taking that deep breath, focusing real hard on the target before you get the gun out. And that's all stuff that the timer causes you to do a lot of times. So I don't think that it's really useful. I don't use them in class, but I think there are applications for them depending on what the drill is and what you're actually trying to do with them. But most people, it just causes you to play a game.
So we've talked about defensive shooting practice and shooting competition, but there's one thing we didn't talk about. Do you ever go out and practice competition shooting specifically to prepare for a match?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I'm shooting this match next Memorial Day, and before I go to that match, I'll get out the IDPA target and I'll work on. It's real important how quickly you can get your gun to full extension and get that first shot off in competition. I mean, it's not so important in defensive shooting because it's really, you can't put a time limit on what your body does in a fight, right? But it is important in competition, and it can cost you a stage win, right? So I'm going to go out there and practice that very deliberate, controlled presentation from the holster, especially since I'm working from appendix most of the time instead of the hip. And, I'll shoot, swung out around a barricade instead of using cover properly, when I'm practicing for a match. And, a lot of those things, shooting those really fast controlled pairs, which is not something that I would ever tell you to do in the context of personal defense, is going to make or break you in a competition. So, but that said, I try not to let my focus of most of my practice sessions be competition. I spend most of my time doing defensive shooting. It's only when I'm getting ready for a match where I actually care about winning, which is just these regionals where there's, I could win a gun or something like that, that I'm actually going to put the time into it.
Okay. We've got just a few minutes left here. And in this few minutes, I want to ask you one final question. This is, let's face it, this is for many, as we've sort of alluded to, this is kind of a little bit divisive when we talk about competition versus defensive shooting. And people on both sides have strong opinions about it. What one single thing, if you could pick one single thing, what one thing do you wish both sides understood?
That they're different things that are both beneficial to any given human being that cares about being a gun person and carrying a gun for personal defense or being a hobbyist, and that there's not anything detrimental enough about doing one or the other that they can't both be done and still you're going to be okay in either way. So, I mean, one's not going to make you die on the streets, and one's not going to turn you into some kind of tactical nerd. You can do both, and it's going to be okay. Play in both pools.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that. Before we go, I want to give everybody a chance to find out how they can get in touch with you, because you do a lot of teaching. In fact, you're going to be teaching a class on the training tour here, I think, towards the end of next month. So tell people your company, what you do, and how they can get in touch with you.
My company's called Fundamental Defense. You can find me on the web at fundamentaldefense.com. Search Fundamental Defense on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all that good stuff. I'm on all those. And my training tour class is June 17th, just north of the DFW Metroplex in Texas. So if you're anywhere close to that, come check it out. And I teach classes regularly west of Fort Worth, and you can find me out here anytime. So.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much for coming on. And everybody, if you didn't read his article on competition shooting, you'll find it at the top of the new articles list here at Personal Defense Network, and it was a great article. So, Aaron, thank you so much for joining us tonight and talking about the subject. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
Anytime. All right, everybody. We're just about to wrap up here. I want to cover a couple of things really quickly. Of course, don't forget about the free Personal Defense Network newsletter. You can sign up. Again, there's a link on the show page. There's links all over the site. You'll have no problem signing up for it. Don't forget the deal on premium membership here at Personal Defense Network. The $10 for your first year of premium membership. There it is, Grant 10, G-R-A-N-T, the number 1, the number 0, all one word. Just put that in the box, and you can get that deal on your first year of membership. Our next show is going to be Thursday, June 1st, the 1st of June, of course, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. Rob Pincus, our executive director here at Personal Defense Network, has a live show every month where he takes your questions. And his next live show is going to be Tuesday, the 23rd, which is this next Tuesday, next week. Again, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, I think 8 p.m. Central, I guess. And his show this month is going to be on legal issues. He'll have some terrific experts along with him and taking your questions about the legal aspects of self-defense. So don't miss that on June 1st. And of course, you can always reach me. Email grant@grantcunningham.com. Please send those emails. I like getting them. And then sometimes I answer some of the emails on the air here. And of course, my website is grantcunningham.com. You can find me on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on what else? A whole bunch of stuff. You can find me. And of course, if you go to Amazon.com, you can search for my name, Grant Cunningham, and you'll find all of my books there. And of course, all my books on the Apple iBooks website as well. On Amazon, you can get them in Kindle and paperback formats. I've got a whole bunch of books out. My latest is Protect Yourself with Your Snub-Nosed Revolver. It's a great book. You should get it. And until next time, I guess that does it for tonight. Again, thanks to Aaron Israel for joining us, talking about competition versus defensive shooting. And I hope to see you again next month, the 1st of June, first day of June, Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. And until then, stay safe.